Hollywood's most powerful man challenged Europe's most handsome star. You're just a pretty face, said Marlon Brando. What Alain Delon showed that night was far more dangerous than beauty. The tension had been building for 3 weeks on the set of the Sicilian Clan, but nobody expected it to explode the way it did. October 1969, Billancourt Studios outside Paris. Two of the world's biggest stars locked in a battle that had nothing to do with the script and everything to do with pride. Marlon Brando arrived in Paris carrying the weight of his legend, the godfather of method acting. The man who de-revolutionized cinema with On the Waterfront and A Streetcar Named Desire. At 45, he was still dangerous, still unpredictable, still the actor every other actor measured themselves against. But Paris wasn't Hollywood. And Alain Delon wasn't impressed. At 34, Delon was the undisputed king of European cinema. Purple Noon, The Leopard, Le Samouraï, a string of masterpieces that had made him the most desired man on the continent. Women swooned, critics raved. Photographers fought each other for the chance to capture those ice-blue eyes that seemed to see straight through your soul. The problem was, Brando saw him as competition. Not artistic competition, Brando knew he was the better actor, but something else, something more primitive. Alpha male competition. From the first day of shooting, Brando had been testing Delon. Small things at first. Interrupting him during rehearsals. Making jokes about pretty boy Europeans, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Questioning his line readings in front of the director. Maybe Alain needs more time to understand the character, Brando would say with that famous half-smile. American method might be too complex for her. Continental approaches. The crew watched nervously. They'd worked with temperamental stars before, but this felt different, more personal, more dangerous. Delon's response was perfect silence. He'd listened to Brando's provocations with those pale eyes showing nothing, no anger, no hurt, no reaction at all, which somehow made it worse. Because Brando was used to getting reactions. His whole career was built on emotional authenticity, on finding the raw nerve in every scene, every relationship, every moment. But Delon was like looking into a mirror made of ice. Beautiful, reflective, completely impenetrable. The other actors gave them space. Jean Gabin, the legendary French star, had seen this kind of tension before. 2 roosters in one henhouse, he muttered to his assistant. Something's gotta give. Director Henry Verneuil tried to manage the situation diplomatically. Separate rehearsals. Different call times. Keep the 2 stars apart except when absolutely necessary for scenes together, but that only made the tension worse. Because when they were on camera together, the electricity was undeniable. Brando brought his trademark intensity, raw, emotional, powerful. Delon brought something else entirely. Control, precision, a coldness that made Brando's heat look almost desperate by comparison. The dailies were extraordinary. The chemistry between them was magnetic, dangerous, completely authentic. Because it was real. They hate each other, the cinematographer whispered to his assistant. And it's the most beautiful thing I've ever filmed. But Brando wasn't satisfied with beautiful. He wanted dominance. 3 weeks into production, during a break between setups, he made his move. The scene they just finished had called for Brando to intimidate Delon's character, a moment of psychological domination that should have been easy for the American legend. Instead, Delon had somehow turned it around. Without changing a single word of dialogue, without altering a single gesture, he'd made Brando's character look like the one who was trying too hard. Like the one who was overcompensating. It was masterful. It was subtle. And it was exactly the kind of European sophistication that drove Brando crazy. You know what your problem is, Alain? Brando said, loud enough for half the crew to hear. Delon was adjusting his costume, not looking up. I wasn't aware I had one. You think acting is about looking good. About being pretty for the camera. Now Delon looked up. Those ice-blue eyes locked onto Brando's face with laser focus. Is that what I think? That's what you are, Brando continued. A pretty face. A model playing dress-up in grown men's roles. The set went dead quiet. Carpenters stopped hammering. Electricians stopped adjusting lights. Everyone was suddenly very interested in this conversation. Delon stood up slowly. All 6 feet of European elegance unfolding with predatory grace. But Brando didn't yet know the secret Delon was hiding in his past. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. 50 crew members held their breath, waiting to see how the most beautiful man in European cinema would respond to being called a pretty face by the most respected actor in Hollywood. Alain Delon adjusted his cufflinks with surgical precision, a small gesture that somehow carried more menace than any raised voice could have managed. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled, almost conversational. Marlon, do you know what the difference is between American actors and European actors? Brando's eyes narrowed. He'd expected anger, defensiveness, maybe even submission. This calm intellectualism caught him off guard. Enlighten me, he said. American actors perform emotion. European actors embody it. The insult was delivered so smoothly that it took a moment for everyone to register what had just happened. Alain Delon had just called Marlon Brando the king of emotional authenticity, a performer, a fake. Brando's jaw tightened. His hands, famous for their expressive gestures in a dozen classic films, slowly curled into fists. You want to talk about authenticity? Brando's voice was rising now, his legendary control starting to crack. You spend 2 hours in makeup every morning, making yourself look perfect. I show up and do the work. The work! Delon repeated the words like they tasted interesting. Yes, let's talk about the work. He walked closer to Brando. Not aggressive, just present. The way a predator is present. Calm, focused, completely alert. Yesterday's scene. The interrogation. You did 17 takes because you couldn't find the truth in the moment. I did it in 1. The crew exchanged glances. This was true. Brando had been struggling with a pivotal scene, searching for the emotional core, the method approach that had made him famous. Meanwhile, Delon had delivered his performance with cold precision on the first attempt. 1 take doesn't mean it was right, Brando shot back. It just means you're not exploring the depth of the character, or it means I understood the character from the beginning, Director Henry. Verneuil stepped forward, sensing the conversation was heading somewhere dangerous. Gentlemen, perhaps we should stay out of this, Henry, Brando said without taking his eyes off Delon. This is between me and the pretty boy. That phrase again. Pretty boy. Said with such contempt that it might as well have been a physical slap. But something strange happened. Instead of getting angry, Alain Delon smiled. Not the charming smile that had melted hearts across Europe. Something else. Something that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. You keep using that phrase, Delon said. Pretty boy, as if beauty is a weakness. As if looking good means you can't be dangerous. He was standing very close to Brando now. Close enough that the American actor could smell his cologne something expensive. Something that spoke of European sophistication and old money. In America, perhaps handsome men are soft, Delon continued. In Europe, we have a different tradition. Jean Gabin, watching from his director's chair, felt a chill run down his spine. He'd known Alain for years, had seen him in different moods, different situations. But he'd never seen this particular look in his eyes. This particular stillness that seemed to vibrate with potential violence. What tradition is that? Brando asked, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. The tradition of beautiful killers. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Brando laughed, but it sounded forced. What are you, some kind of tough guy? You grew up rich, didn't you? Private schools, servants, everything handed to you on a silver platter? Actually, no. Delon's voice was still quiet, still controlled. I grew up in foster homes, abandoned therefore. Learned to fight in the streets of Boulogne-Billancourt before I learned to read properly. The crew was completely silent now. This wasn't acting anymore. This was 2 men stripping away their public personas, getting down to something raw and real. Street fighter, Brando mocked. Sure you were. 3 years in French Indochina. Navy commandos. Special operations. The kind of work that doesn't make it into official reports. Now Brando was paying attention. Really paying attention, because Delon wasn't boasting. Wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just stating facts in the same tone he might use to discuss the weather. I killed my first man when I was 19, Delon continued. Close quarters, with a knife. I can still remember the sound his breath made when the blade went in. The makeup artist dropped her compact. The sound of it hitting the concrete floor echoed through the studio like a gunshot. You're full of shit, Brando said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Am I? Delon tilted his head slightly. Tell me, Marlon, in all your method preparation, in all your emotional research, have you ever actually killed anyone? Have you ever felt a man's life end in your hands? Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and watched them realize they're about to die? Brando's mouth opened, but no words came out. Because if you haven't, Delon said, then every tough guy you've ever played on screen is just performance. Just pretend. Just pretty acting. The reversal was complete. Somehow, without raising his voice, without making a single threatening gesture, Alain Delon had turned the tables entirely. The pretty boy had become the predator. The American tough guy had become the actor playing dress-up. Brando's face was flushed now. His legendary control completely shattered. You think you're so fucking tough? I don't think anything, Delon replied. I know what I am. Yeah? And what's that? Delon's smile widened slightly. Still beautiful. Still charming, but underneath it, something else entirely. Something that made the most powerful actor in Hollywood take an involuntary step backward. I'm the man your characters pretend to be. The insult was devastating, perfect, surgical in its precision. Brando's hands were shaking now. With rage, with embarrassment, with the sudden realization that he'd picked a fight with someone who operated on a completely different level than he'd anticipated. We'll see about that, he said, his voice rough with anger. We'll fucking see about that. He turned and walked toward his trailer, but stopped at the door. When he looked back, his eyes were blazing with something dangerous. Something real. When cameras wrap tonight, he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. You and me. No cameras, no crew, no pretty costumes. Just us. The challenge hung in the air like a physical thing. 50 people watching, waiting, holding their breath. Alain Delon didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there in his perfectly tailored costume, looking like a Renaissance sculpture come to life. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, he nodded once. Almost imperceptibly, but everyone saw it. And that's when that cold glint appeared in Delon's eyes. The word spread through Billancourt Studios like wildfire. By lunch break, everyone knew. The pretty boy and the method master were going to settle it after wrap. No cameras. No witnesses except whoever was brave enough to stick around. Production assistant whispered to script supervisor. Script supervisor told the cinematographer. Cinematographer mentioned it to the sound engineer. By 4 p.m., half of Paris seemed to know that Marlon Brando and Alain Delon were going to fight. Henry Verneuil tried to intervene during the afternoon setup. This is insane, gentlemen. You're both professionals. Surely we can resolve this like civilized. Stay out of it, Henry. Brando cut him off. He'd been pacing his trailer for 2 hours, working himself into the kind of emotional state that had made him famous. Raw, primal, dangerous. But when he looked across the set at Delon, what he saw unsettled him. Nothing. Alain Delon was sitting in his director's chair, reading a copy of Le Figaro, completely relaxed, as if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't just been challenged to a fight by the most powerful actor in Hollywood. He looked like he was waiting for a pleasant dinner reservation, not a potential beating. Look at him, Brando muttered to his stand-in. Doesn't have a care in the world? Probably thinks this is all some kind of joke. But Jean Gabin, who'd been watching Delon for the past 3 hours, knew better. He'd seen that particular stillness before, in the war. In men who'd killed and knew they might have to kill again. Delon wasn't relaxed. He was ready. The afternoon shoot was tense, professional, surreal. Both men delivered their lines perfectly, hit their marks, took direction without complaint. But underneath the professional courtesy, everyone could feel it building. The pressure. The inevitability. At 7 p.m., Verneuil called, "That's a wrap." The crew began their usual routine packing equipment, securing sets, preparing for tomorrow, but nobody left. Grips found reasons to organize cables. Lighting technicians discovered urgent adjustments that needed making. Even the catering truck lingered in the parking lot. Everyone wanted to see what would happen when Hollywood's king of authenticity faced off against Europe's beautiful killer. Brando emerged from his trailer at 7:45. He'd changed out of his costume into jeans and a black t-shirt. Practical clothes. Fighting clothes. His hands were taped like a boxer's, and he'd been warming up, shadowboxing, getting his blood flowing. He looked ready for war. Delon appeared 5 minutes later, still in his perfectly tailored costume pants and white dress shirt. No tape on his hands, no warm-up routine. He'd simply walked out of his trailer like he was heading to a cocktail party. They met in the center of the main soundstage. Empty now except for some scattered equipment and maybe 30 crew members who found excuses to stay behind. The overhead lights created harsh shadows, turning the space into something that looked more like a boxing ring than a movie set. Last chance to back down, pretty boy. Brando said. His voice carried that familiar method intensity, the emotional rawness that had made him a legend. Delon began unbuttoning his shirt. Slowly. Methodically. When he pulled it off, the crew gasped collectively. His torso was a roadmap of violence. Scars crisscrossed his chest and abdomen. Some looked surgical. Others looked like knife wounds. One, running from his left shoulder blade to his spine, looked like it had come from something much worse than a street fight. These, Delon said quietly, indicating the scars, are from men who thought I was just a pretty face. Brando's eyes widened. This wasn't what he'd expected. He'd expected a pampered European actor who'd fold at the first sign of real violence. Instead, he was looking at someone who'd clearly survived things that would have broken most men. You still have time to walk away, Delon said. His voice was gentle, almost kind. No shame in it. We can tell everyone we talked it out like gentlemen, but Brando had gone too far to back down now. Too many people watching, too much pride at stake. Too many years of being the toughest guy in every room he'd ever entered. Fuck that, he said and swung. Brando was bigger than Delon. Heavier. Stronger. His right cross came with all the power of a man who'd grown up scrapping in the streets of Omaha, who'd survived the brutal world of New York theater, who'd never backed down from anyone in his entire life. It should have ended the fight before it started. Instead, it hit nothing but air. Delon had moved, not quickly. Not dramatically. Just moved like water flowing around a rock. Like smoke avoiding a fan. One moment he was in the path of Brando's fist. The next, he was 6 inches to the left. Brando stumbled forward, off balance, confused. He spun around to find Delon standing exactly where he'd been before, hands at his sides, looking almost apologetic. Marlon, he said quietly, are you sure you want to do this? Nobody knew that Alain Delon really knew how to fight. What happened next would be talked about in Hollywood and European film circles for decades. Marlon Brando, the man who'd never backed down from anyone, found himself facing something he'd never encountered before. A classically trained killer disguised as a movie star. Brando charged again, this time with a combination left jab, right cross, left hook. Street fighting moves he'd learned growing up rough in Nebraska. Moves that had served him well in bar fights and backstage brawls throughout his career. But Alain Delon wasn't there to receive them. He moved like liquid mercury, flowing around Brando's attacks with an economy of motion that was almost balletic. No wasted energy, no dramatic flourishes. Just precise, calculated movement that kept him exactly 1 inch beyond the reach of Brando's increasingly desperate swings. Stand still and fight like a man. Brando roared, his famous composure completely shattered. I am fighting, Delon replied calmly. You're just not very good at it. The crew watched in stunned silence. This wasn't what anyone had expected. Brando was supposed to demolish the pretty European. Instead, he was swinging wildly at shadows while Delon danced around him like he was avoiding raindrops. What they couldn't see, what only Jean Gabin understood from his position near the wall, was the systematic way Delon was dismantling Brando psychologically. Each missed punch. Each moment of looking foolish in front of the crew. Each second of failing to land a blow on someone who should have been easy prey. It was psychological warfare disguised as physical combat. You know what your real problem is, Marlon? Delon said, still moving, still avoiding every wild swing. You think violence is about emotion, about rage, about losing control. Brando threw a haymaker that would have knocked out a heavyweight boxer. It whistled past Delon's ear, missing by millimeters. In the military, they teach you differently, Delon continued conversationally. Violence is mathematics. Angles and timing, distance and leverage. Emotion gets you killed. He stopped moving, just stopped. Brando, mid-swing, suddenly found himself face to face with those ice-blue eyes. Close enough to see his own reflection in them. Close enough to smell that expensive European cologne. Close enough to realize he was in serious trouble. Delon's hand moved, not fast, not dramatically, just moved. His palm struck Brando's wrist. A precise pressure point strike that sent electric pain shooting up the American actor's arm. Brando's hand went numb instantly, his fist opening involuntarily. Before Brando could react, Delon's other hand was at his throat. Not choking. Not strangling. Just resting there, fingers positioned with surgical precision over the carotid artery. Do you feel that? Delon asked quietly. The pressure point? In exactly 3 seconds, if I apply 2 more pounds of pressure, you'll lose consciousness. In 7 seconds, you'll be dead. Brando tried to move, tried to break free, but found himself paralyzed. Not by fear, though, there was plenty of that, but by the absolute certainty that Delon meant every word. This is what they don't teach in method acting, Delon whispered, his mouth close to Brando's ear. Real violence isn't emotional. It's technical, it's precise. It's knowing exactly how much force it takes to break a man's larynx. The crew was frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. They were watching something that transcended entertainment, transcended celebrity drama. They were watching a predator explain hunting techniques to its prey. I could kill you right now, Delon continued, his voice still gentle, still conversational. Before anyone could stop me, before you could scream. The coroner would say heart attack, stress, the pressure of the fight. Brando's eyes were wide with terror now. The great Marlon Brando, reduced to a frightened child by a man he'd dismissed as a pretty face. But I won't, Delon said, and stepped back. Brando collapsed to his knees, gasping, his hand clutching his throat. Alive but utterly defeated. Delon picked up his shirt from the floor, began putting it on with the same meticulous care he'd shown when removing it. You're a great actor, Marlon, he said, buttoning his cuffs. Perhaps the greatest. But acting and being are different things. You act tough. I am tough. You perform violence. I've lived it. He walked toward his trailer, then stopped and looked back. Next time you want to test someone, make sure you know what you're testing. The set remained silent for a full minute after he disappeared. Brando, still on his knees, looked around at the faces staring down at him. Crew members who D watched him get systematically destroyed by a man who D never even worked up a sweat. Finally, Jean Gabin walked over and helped him to his feet. Son, the old French actor said quietly, you just learned something that can't be taught in any acting school. Some men are dangerous because they pretend to be. Others are dangerous because they choose not to be, but the truly shocking thing had yet to happen. The story should have ended there. Marlon Brando humiliated, Alain Delon victorious, the crew dispersing with the kind of gossip that becomes Hollywood legend. But what happened next transformed a simple fight into something that would define both men's careers for decades. 20 minutes after walking away, Alain Delon returned to the soundstage. Brando was still there, sitting on an equipment crate, his head in his hands. The crew had mostly dispersed, embarrassed witnesses to a great man's fall. Only Jean Gabin remained, smoking a cigarette and watching the broken American actor with something like pity. Delon walked over slowly. In his hands he carried 2 glasses and a bottle of cognac, expensive cognac. The kind that costs more than most people make in a month. Marlon, he said quietly. Brando looked up, his eyes still carrying the shock of what had just happened. He expected mockery. Expected the European to twist the knife to complete his humiliation. Instead, Delon sat down beside him and poured 2 glasses. Drink, he said, offering one to Brando. Why? Brando's voice was hoarse, damaged. Because I owe you an apology. The words hung in the empty studio like incense in a cathedral. Sacred, unexpected. True, Brando took the glass but didn't drink. You owe me an apology? I'm the one who started this. I called you a pretty boy. I challenged you to a fight. Yes, Delon agreed. But I let it go too far. I could have stopped it after the first punch. Should have. Instead, I humiliated you in front of people who respect you. That was cruel, unnecessary. He took a sip of cognac, savoring it like communion wine. You see, Marlon, what you don't understand is that I've been where you are. Dismissed because of how I look. Told I'm not serious, not real, not dangerous. I've spent 15 years proving people wrong, and I've gotten very good at it. Too good, perhaps. Brando drank them, the cognac burning away some of the shame. You could have killed me. Yes. Would you have? Delon considered the question seriously. No, but I wanted you to believe I would. That's the difference between us, Marlon. You become your characters. I control mine. They sat in silence for several minutes. 2 of the world's most famous men sharing expensive liquor in an empty movie studio. Outside, Paris hummed with its usual evening energy, unaware that cinema history was being rewritten in a forgotten corner of Billancourt. I've never met anyone like you, Brando said eventually. Most people haven't. Is it true? About Indochina? About the men you killed? Some of it, Delon replied. Enough to make the lesson stick. Brando finished his cognac, set the glass down carefully. I spent my whole career trying to find authentic emotion. Real truth. And you just showed me something I've never seen before. Real violence, real control, real power. And what did you learn? That I don't want to be that kind of man. Brando looked at him with something like wonder. How do you carry it? The knowledge of what you can do? Very carefully, Delon said. The most dangerous men are the ones who choose not to be dangerous. The ones who could destroy you but prefer to create instead. They shook hands then. Not the casual handshake of actors wrapping a scene. The firm grip of men who'd seen each other's souls and found respect there. The film wrapped 3 weeks later. During those final weeks, something extraordinary happened. Brando and Delon became friends. Real friends. They would remain so for the rest of Brando's life. In interviews years later, Brando would describe that night as a turning point. I thought I knew what strength looked like, he told a journalist in 1987. Alain taught me that real strength is knowing when not to use it. For his part, Delon rarely spoke about the incident publicly. But in 1995, at Brando's 70th birthday party, he raised a glass and said simply, to Marlon, who taught me that even dangerous men can be gentle. And that the greatest performance is knowing when to stop acting. The crew members who witnessed that night never forgot it. They spread the story throughout the industry, but always with respect, never as gossip. Because they'd seen something rare. 2 giants finding friendship through confrontation. When Marlon Brando died in 2004, Alain Delon flew to Los Angeles for the funeral. He didn't speak publicly, didn't give interviews. But those who were there said he stood at the graveside longer than anyone else. As he walked away, someone asked what he was thinking about. A cognac shared between enemies who became brothers, he said. And the night I learned that sometimes the best way to win a fight is to help your opponent stand back up. You won't believe it. But 40 years later, this is what Brando said about the incident. Alain didn't just beat me that night. He taught me what real strength looks like. And then he showed me mercy. That's why he was the most dangerous man I ever met. And the best friend I ever had. Tell us in the comments, is beauty or power more valuable? Which star are you supporting?